stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. We share stories for many reasons, to persuade, to entertain, to connect. What we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're perceived by the people you're interacting with. When you figure out which stories to share, difficult bosses and coworkers, successes, failures, the next step is to develop how you share them. Have you figured out your patterns, your roles in those successes, the discomfort, and your challenges? In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you. You'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into the lessons from each of those. How many times have you been sharing a story only to be interrupted by a person eager to share his own? When I'm working with clients on communication skills, I remind them to listen for understanding, not to respond. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen and consider your own related stories, to listen and consider which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. What a treat. Today, I get to interview a dear friend of mine. Her name is Gabriel. And in the last year and a half or so, she has shifted her interest to helping people through life coaching, and in particular through Enneagram training. And also, she became certified recently with the DISC assessment. So Joy, thank you for joining me on the Your Stories Don't Define You podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, me too. I'm always happy to do this, especially with somebody that I know, but I know I'm going to come out with some really interesting insights that we have never discussed in our relationship before. So it's always exciting to me.
You already know my secrets.
Well, I don't know about that. But we will. I always start my podcast asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people wouldn't know about them. And I do that so that our listeners get some context for the stories we'll be diving into later on in the recording. So what do you think?
I know something that's been driving me crazy lately that I do want everyone to know about. And that's my face gets me in a lot of trouble.
Your face gets you in trouble. Tell me about that.
Well, it's less the face itself. I think it's a fine face, but the way it works, I'm utterly transparent. Like you see, like people in movies can be transparent that way, and it's really good for them because, like Bryan Cranston's good at this. You know, you just watch him act out a scene, and it's like his thoughts are written on his forehead. You know, his expressions are so crystal clear to what he's trying to portray. I'm that way just by accident. So I can't, like, for example, I'm the worst liar that ever lived. So I learned long ago not to even try.
That's awesome. So what you're saying is that you don't have a poker face.
Exactly. And in some ways that's benefited me greatly because, for example, I never got to brood very often if anyone was around me because I'd have like two negative thoughts and they turn to me, "What's wrong, Joy?" Because it's just on my face. And that's good for me. But the bad part is if people don't know that my face is transparent, if they think that I am a normal person who only a small amount, perhaps if you're feeling very strongly, will leak out unless you feel super comfortable with the person. Well, they can assume that if I look a little annoyed, it means that there's a great towering rage inside me out of nowhere.
Well, it's actually just a small annoyance.
Exactly. Or a medium annoyance, but whatever level of annoyance, it's on my face, and that's the complete extent of it.
Okay. So you think people may exaggerate what they think you're feeling based on your expression?
Exactly. I've always been a pretty good communicator when you're right. I've always been pretty good at communication whenever someone would bring up like, "Hey, when you said this one thing, Joy, it bothered me," or "Joy, I think you hate me." You know, if they would tell me what was going on, I could clear it up. But in my life, a lot of people I found out later have decided not to tell me things like that just because they think I'm going to take it really poorly or something because they assume I'm much more volatile than I actually am.
Wow. I'm actually thinking back to some of our interactions, especially when you were younger, like 17, 18.
Right.
I can imagine how I would make certain assumptions about your mood based on your expression. But you're right. I probably was exaggerating what you were feeling because there's this assumption that only the tip of the iceberg is showing.
Right, exactly. No, it's not a tip of the iceberg. It's an ice cube, and you're seeing all of it.
That actually reminds me of when I worked for the university system, and during meetings sometimes I would make these faces like when I would hear somebody say something kind of stupid or arrogant. And my boss one time told me, Sarah, you have to get a poker face. You can't
Oh my God,
demonstrate
yeah.
that level of annoyance to the Board of Regents.
No, that's exactly it. Or I once, our mom, for example, mom, she accidentally made fun of me when I was feeling really vulnerable one time because my face had fallen so dramatically. She just assumed I was putting on this face to make her feel bad. It's
Oh
like,
my
no,
gosh.
that's me.
I'm really feeling this way. Oh my gosh. That actually is a really good segue into the reason I wanted to interview for you for this podcast. And just for our listeners, understanding when Joy talks about mom, it's Twyla, who happens to be one of my dearest friends. I consider her my soul sister, and we sing together. So you may hear some reference to some of our history as a result of my relationship with Joy's mother. Mm-hmm. So back to the reason I called you today. When we first started talking about what I was doing with StrengthsFinder, it was right about the time that you and your mother were really getting into the Enneagram assessment and results and analyzing your results and her results and starting to come to some really incredible insights about your relationship with each other and also her difficult relationship with her family.
Right. Absolutely.
So I remember talking to your mother, and she said that you were really, really coming up with these incredible insights. And she didn't think it was just because she knew you. She thought it was because you truly understood and had an innate understanding of what the Enneagram really means and how to apply it. And I don't know if you remember this, but that's when I suggested that maybe becoming certified in Enneagram, learning to really coach people using that tool would be a good step in the right direction. Do you remember that?
I do. And it was absolutely secretly my dream path in life forever. If I do have any better than average understanding of the Enneagram, it's only because what it talks about, just human personality and their reactions to their fears, is what I've struggled to understand ever since forever. We were talking about this before, but I always had a lot of trouble reading social cues from people. It might have been some sort of spectrum thing or just like something missing in my brain chemistry, but it was very awkward. And mom would have to inform me after every social interaction with anybody, like, okay, when you do that, it makes them think that you hate them. Maybe it was my face back then too. But
getting you into trouble.
Yeah, exactly. But since I've learned the Enneagram, it's been a great explanation for this, but I'm a type 8, the challenger, who our greatest fear is being dominated, controlled, or killed by other people, just harmed by the intentions of another human being. And so me not being able to understand them or predict them so much, that was a huge danger factor, according to my core fear. So I had to learn to understand them.
Oh.
And
okay.
At first it was psychology, then like self-help, I would say. I was just looking for, my problem was psychology talks a lot about the extremes in life, not a lot about how normal people be and do. And self-help is, that's all well and good, but it's sometimes hard to determine, how helpful it is or how much it's just trying to make you feel better.
Right. And confirming your issues instead of trying to help you apply what you can, what you're learning about yourself to actually improve.
Exactly. And, and the Enneagram accounts for this, what helps someone else just enables someone else. Like it yeah, there's different ways to be healthier, and sometimes something that would be really logical for almost everybody is the worst thing possible for someone else. And the Enneagram covers this. I found it through a Bored Panda, which is I think a Chinese BuzzFeed knockoff website.
Mm-hmm.
And not even the most popular post, but someone had illustrated a few of the subtypes. And the illustrations were really, really blank, and I didn't really get it. But the descriptions they had of these personalities were so interesting and legit sounding. So I looked it up, and it was a revelation. It was like a religious experience. It was all the answers to everything I'd been trying to figure out about people, what they were afraid of, what they wanted, and how to tell.
Right. Well, and what I was interested in talking to you about is the fact that you have Enneagram, now you have DISC, and you took the strengths assessment so that I could read your strengths,
Mm-hmm.
so that we could kind of talk through how these different assessments relate to each other, and then how we use them to improve communication and improve relationships. Because I think far too many people, they do the assessments, they're totally intrigued by the results, they get really self-absorbed about the results, but they never take the next step of understanding where they're getting in their own way as a result of those assessment answers to their questions. And they never take that next step to either talk to a coach or figure out, if they can on their own, how to apply these lessons, the things that they're learning about themselves, to actually improve themselves rather than to confirm who they are and give themselves excuses.
Oh, absolutely. I was talking with another Enneagram practitioner, this gal Athena, who's amazing. And she, the way she described it is the Enneagram doesn't put you in a box. It shows you the box you're in and shows you how to get out of it. And we agree that it's just a damn shame that someone could learn so much about their strengths and weaknesses and not use that information to escape from the things that make them miserable.
Right. And pouring that energy into staying there. Just
saying like, you know what, this is my box and it's my favorite box ever, and no one can make me leave it because I'm really happy with my problems.
Exactly. Well, because it gives them some sense of comfort that they know their problems and they don't have to worry about what other problems might be out there if they're so focused on the ones they already know about.
The devil you know, yeah.
Yes. So you said that you're the challenger, and you suggested that you said number 3, the achiever?
The motivator or achiever.
You said that there was a sub one for me, or 2.
Yes. One of if I have anything that could be unique as a contribution to the Enneagram, I've come up with a series of questions for helping someone identify their wing, if you subscribe to the belief that if you have one wing, you don't have the other. Some people believe you can have some of one or the other, and life's an effort of balance. But I believe that what determines your wing is the same factor that makes those two types that could be your wing opposite each other. And so for a 3, the question would be, with all the things that you want to achieve in life, is it in an effort to impress yourself and fulfill some deep core thing? Like maybe you don't know what you're going for, but you know you'll know it when you get there. Mm-hmm. Or is there a specific goal in mind, a specific achievement, or the opinion of someone you want to win, or anything outside of yourself that determines success from failure?
Huh. So I could really have both of those wings, the 2 and the 4, in different contexts.
Right. Quite possibly. I think that at the time we last talked about it, we decided you were a 2 wing because 2s are the helpers who want to bring happiness and love to people and receive it back, but they suffer from sometimes having too strict standards as what counts as love and gratitude from the people they help. And so if the person doesn't express it in their right love language, it won't be as fulfilling to them.
Uh-huh. I could see how that would have gotten in my way a few years ago.
See?
Definitely. And it's interesting because I was thinking about this as I was walking on the mountain today. And what I realized, remember I said, but I see some of the challenger in me, and you explained that I think this is what you said, was that it's really the motivation behind my actions that makes
Yes.
me more an achiever than a challenger. And
absolutely. It is why you do it.
right. And so when we look at your strengths, and I was thinking about that in the context of strengths because it's the same idea that you're motivated by things differently. So you may have any of the relationship building strengths in your top strengths, but you do have relator, which is the one relationship building strength you have in your top 5. And
right.
So you are motivated by the relationships you're building, as opposed to leaning into your strategic, where you might be motivated in your relationships strategically. Does that make sense?
Right. So, so it's the relationship for its own sake, not for the purpose of achieving anything else.
Exactly. And so it really depends on where you are at any given time, where your motivation might shift. Where if you had more of the relationship building strengths in the top 5, I would say that the majority of your motivation comes through those relationships. But it looks to me like you have more in the strategic thinking area, which means that
yes, 4 out of 5
in general. So your motivation really leans toward learning, and it's more about the task-oriented than the people-oriented motivation.
Right. That correlates very strongly with in DISC values. There is a value of a theoretical value, which is caring about understanding the truth of a situation. And me and everyone I know, actually, we score highly in that. I think it's so do you. You scored a 68 out of 100 there. I think it's something that I need to get along with a person, is for them to care about the truth and want to talk about random science.
Oh, that totally makes sense. I have my DISC assessment open right now, just in case I needed to review
Perfect.
it. I hadn't really even thought about that fact, but you're right. If I'm talking to somebody who doesn't have that need for truth and for speaking at that deeper level, then I don't really have much tolerance for that.
Yeah, you just run out of things to talk about quicker.
Yeah. And you can still love the person, even like the person, but choose not to spend a lot of time with them. So, that's where you can really look at application. So if you know that about yourself, being able to understand where that other person is coming from, that they would prefer to keep it at a shallower level, that diving deep makes them uncomfortable, and being able to accept that in them, but also set the boundaries that you need to set in order to find satisfaction in that relationship.
That is absolutely true. And you mentioned earlier about how we've used the Enneagram to help understand mom's fraught relationship with our extended family. And one of those things is both her mother and sister, who were closest to her, they would score low theoretical. They like talking about the surface and only the surface of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that must have been hard to sit around and make chit chat with for all those years.
Right. And that I can imagine that if you don't have this kind of insight early enough, then the damage to your relationship becomes permanent. Especially if the other people don't want to learn and understand.
Right. Yeah, it's such a growing journey to come to understand these personality theories together and use it to, the number of times that both mom and dad would be like, I'm being low D, when they're having trouble making a decision.
Mm-hmm.
It's become a shorthand for understanding each other. And if any one of us didn't have an interest in that degree of personal growth, it would just sour the whole thing, I feel.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think that when we are on a self-growth trajectory, if we are looking at these possibilities to make ourselves better and to improve our relationships, and we come across people who don't have that same drive, or we don't see it because it's showing up in a different way, it makes it really hard to keep that relationship strong.
Yeah.
I've seen that happen in
Yeah.
long-term marriages where one of the partners is ready for growth. They're in this major, major transition phase. Like either they realize how dissatisfied they are with their work, or they're empty nesting, or they're hitting a decade mark, a birthday that's a decade, that they suddenly start to feel uncomfortable and want some sort of transition or transformation. And the other member of the couple doesn't, either they don't get it, or that person isn't taking them along for their journey. And that
Right.
can cause permanent damage.
Yeah, it's hard because it can butt heads with the whole principle of never try to change the person you're with, right? So you marry who you marry or date who you date, and if you yourself try to start changing, then in a way they might need to change in order to still have a relationship with you, but you can't try to make them change. So it can be very unfortunate when
Right.
that doesn't match up, or
Right.
just a huge blessing when it does. Like, I think my parents are a great example of, like, mom's the one that's been taking an active role in changing her life, and dad's been infinitely supportive the whole time. And it's awesome.
Right. And not necessarily to change his. I mean, he's not on the same trajectory of, it's a completely different type of personal growth. But the fact that she's talking to him and taking him along on the journey is definitely a huge indicator of the success of their communication and relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get that too. I think Bob and I are kind of on that same page. I think that's why the four of us have always been so close, is that we have that in common. So I would love to hear from you a story about an aha moment you had, in particular when you were taking the training for the Enneagram, and then maybe when you had another one in the disc. And I'll share that when I went in for the training for the Gallup certification under StrengthsFinders, I signed up for a week training, mostly because I knew I needed some sort of credential to really get my coaching business off the ground. I knew I needed a foot in the door with certain agencies. So I looked at a few different credentials and trainings and decided on the Gallup one, partly because of the name, the recognition, but also because I love the whole concept of using the assessment to understand your strengths, as opposed to figuring out what all your weaknesses are and trying to fix them. I just really liked the concept behind it. And I remember walking into the training feeling a little bit critical, waiting to find out how applied this was going to be, because I'm one of those people like you that if I can't apply it, it is meaningless to me.
Right.
And so I remember going in kind of testing, critical about what this was going to be like. And as one of my clients would call it, was I going to buy into it? And I remember after the very first day, that Monday, the training was so intense. And I remember after the very first day, when I got back to the hotel room and talking to Bob about the training, I realized in that moment how applied this could really be, and that I may have misunderstood assessments in general because I had always dismissed them for that exact reason, the exact reason I get annoyed, which is, people take the assessment, they learn a little about themselves, and then they stop. And I remember having this awakening that Monday night as I was sitting with Bob and talking about the training and the people in the room, that awakening that, oh my gosh, I've been misunderstanding and underestimating the use of these tools for years. So what was your aha with Enneagram? I mean, you had already, I'm going to put this in air quotes, bought in to the meaningful descriptions in there, but what was the moment?
The moment, so we're talking specifically in the training situation, surrounded by the other Enneagram kids?
Not necessarily. It could have been a week after. It could have been 2 months after.
Right.
But, you have, I know you have that kind of story.
Oh, well, what I love, what the Enneagram, how it helped me, my goal just before I found it, like the thing I was asking the universe for, and it so graciously provided, was an understanding of who I was, because I've always been this ambitious self-transformer. I've always been looking for the bad programs to weed out of my brain, or I'm prone to hero worship. I would find some usually fictional character or actor, always a guy who I admired and I wanted to learn how they do. And in that process of jumping from influence I was imitating to influence I was imitating, about, I'd say, a year and a half ago, I realized I have no idea who I actually am. And it was, yeah, and that was my question. Like, what are my strengths so that I can lean into them? What is the thing that, when you look at someone's life trajectory, what does it seem like I'm setting myself up to do? And the Enneagram was there to say, you're really good at toughing stuff out, and you're really bad at taking breaks, and you're afraid of people. Fix it. It was so handy.
Oh my gosh. You just really struck me with that line. I had to type it in so I would remember it. The influencer I was imitating. Is that what you said? The influencer I was imitating.
Probably.
Yeah. And I think that's just something we need to hold on to for a second, that you recognized that you knew that you were imitating influencers rather than figuring out your own identity.
Right. It was a big part, like just a self-loathing thing. Like, I suck, but these guys don't, so I'll just be like them, being the discount version of someone I approve of. Yeah,
I think people do that well into their 30s. I mean, the fact that you figured this out in your teens is really extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
Thank you.
And I'm just kind of blown away by that recognition so early, and then being able to find a tool to help you determine your identity using your real feelings and fears and strengths, and then going from there.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing to have a tiny bit of certainty, a tiny bit of like, I know this is what I naturally do, so I don't need to force myself to get better at it, for example, because, with for example, a challenger, again, as someone who prioritizes strength, as a kid, I would be like, no, I need to not turn into a wimp. Well, I'm incapable of turning into a wimp. I'm a challenger. And so it's it was just an obsessive track. It's a good thing I've let go of the need to reinforce my own strength, for example.
So it's actually very similar to the whole concept of StrengthsFinder, which is find what you're already good at and get even better at it. Really rely on it, because that's how you see the world. It's how you solve problems and build relationships. Use it.
Right. I can tell you an aha moment with StrengthsFinders. This was much more recently when I was taking your test. I all the strategic thinking in my top 5. When you clicked on them, I got like the full page of description and advice. Every single one of them, except for the relator one, of course, was recommending like, oh, get some time for yourself and think about stuff, And that's been a lifelong journey of me thinking I'm an asshole who's staying in a cave and avoiding the world. Like I'll be having a great time figuring this thing out, and then have this momentary crisis. Maybe that's my social skill crisis of, oh no, I haven't been talking to anyone today. I'm a loser. And I just didn't. It felt like a vice that I could not resist. When instead it's the best thing for me, given my strengths.
Yes, absolutely. And you just brought me right back to an episode I recorded a couple months ago with Mark Bowden about the importance of inauthenticity.
Oh, yeah. I listened to a bit of that. I loved it.
Thank you. Yeah, that one, it just, they all stick with me, but that one in particular just popped into my head because there's like this fine line between your intellection and ideation. You're leaning into that part of your brain to really, and your personality, to really dig into deep thoughts and come up with brilliant ideas. And thank goodness.
Brilliant ideas.
Yeah, well, but think about it this way. Because you have relator right up there with those other strengths, it's not so much
right in
that
the
you have
middle.
to, right. So you don't have to necessarily force yourself to go be with people in order to be
Right.
successful. But you innately understand that in order to have your ideas be heard and valued and applied and fixing problems for people in our communities, that you have to lean into that relator as well. You can't just stay in your cave. You understand that for your brilliant ideas to be shared, you have to lean into that other strength of relator.
Someone has to hear them. Yeah.
Exactly. And the danger would be if you use this as an excuse to say, well, my strengths tell me I should stay in a cave and think.
Of course, that's I had a thought to share about the importance of authenticity. I love that concept of like knowing yourself in a way that either makes you resigned or use it as an excuse. To the point, there's this recent-ish Portlandia episode called You Do You. And one of the subplots is hilarious because it's this gal in her apartment, and the guy next door is like making a load of noise and blaring rock and roll, and is making the table shake. So she goes next door and asks him to turn it down. And he says, "I would, but at the moment, I'm kind of living my truth. I mean, what kind of person wouldn't want someone else to live their truth?" And then it just continues on that track with pretty soon he's like murdering people and telling the cops that he's living his truth, and they're shaming the girl for being upset about it. It's hilarious.
Yeah, that sounds like a Portlandia episode that our son Max would want to watch. That's his sense of humor. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
And that is always the question. Are you going to use it as an excuse? So before we wrap this up, I would love to hear one more story from you about an aha moment. And as you've been working through training as a coach, working with a client or a friend that you've been experimenting with, one of those moments where you walked away totally satisfied and thought, oh my gosh, I was meant to do this. This is what I'm meant to do.
Yeah. I've had a number of those moments because there's nothing more fulfilling than actually feeling like you helped someone, like helped them in their brains, like not hate the world a little bit. Like that's fucking incredible. But I think that there was this incredible moment where, like, it's hard to describe because it was an extremely difficult time where two friends were fighting, and my natural inclination would be to jump in the middle and defend the one I thought was right and fight the battle for them. But through learning actually about my own nature, I realized the correct decision was to leave them alone until someone actually asked for help. But the incredible thing is, after like sitting around feeling like I was a complete useless piece of something, eventually they did come for help, and I was able to give some advice. Instead of fighting, I was helping the healing process, and that was my way of defending them. And that was incredibly different from any sort of, heroism I had ever attempted before. It was, painful when I couldn't do anything, but then what I could do was so much more effective. And I don't know, it changed something.
It triggered a whole different trajectory for your mind space, is what it did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ah, that's awesome. That's the best feeling, when you suddenly realize that the right thing to do is the uncomfortable thing to do.
Yes, and when if it pays off, you're like, yes, I suffered, and it wasn't useless.
Right, and it wasn't the worst thing.
The reason that I feel a lot of those things, the reason you don't do the right thing is you don't know why it's the right thing. You only think you know why it's the right thing. And then you actually try it out feeling like you're making the worst decision ever, and it pays off 100-fold. And you're like, oh, this is all that interesting stuff I've been missing out on based on doing the right thing. Crazy.
Right. Exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to thinking that you're doing the right thing because it's your instinct. where
Right.
your immediate instinct, I should say, because
Yes.
if you know
Right.
certain things about yourself, you can take a step back from that immediate instinct and look at the bigger picture.
Right, and connect with the deeper instinct of your soul rather than just your immediate perception.
Right, exactly. And one of the things that I've been using the most when it comes to my work with clients and also relationships with people I'm close with is that ability to take a step back and give it a moment before I respond to something. That and I can't remember which philosopher it was. I just wrote it down somewhere. Is that space between stimulant and response, and that ability to see a stimulant for what it is without judgment.
Right. The woman who taught me DISC, she used to say, "Let silence do the heavy lifting."
Yes. And many of us have trouble with that. I think achiever on the Enneagram, achiever and challenger would really struggle with that. Your mother has no problem with that.
It's true.
Yeah, her difficulty is listening too much.
It's true. DISC talks about that, saying this was deep in like the manual that they sent as a PDF. We didn't even cover this in the class, but the original concept of DIS and C, where they're a measurement of whether you are naturally inclined to take an active or passive role in hostile or friendly situations. And so your scores indicate you take an active role no matter what.
That's really funny.
Right.
It wasn't always like that.
Positive situations, you're a bit flexible.
Right. And it's interesting because I wasn't always like that. And I think what happened was I started getting more confident in my ability to participate in an effective way as opposed to making it worse. And
yes, that is important.
That's a middle child thing. When you start to realize that your participation, if done right, can make things better. If done wrong, can make things worse, and you can become the target, which is what happens often as a kid when you're the middle child. Is you try to get in the middle of it, and you end up being the target for both.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
and I've never had a sibling, so I'm not familiar with those dynamics, but that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's something you might want to talk to your mom about, and it may be part of why your uncle has struggled over the years with those relationships. So,
I do remember I saw a joke on Tumblr that said that had a list of how the attitudes of all the kids. It was like only childs are like, "What is compromise? You guys all suck." And the thing for middle child was disappears under mysterious circumstances.
Yeah, pretty much. So basically, when you put all of these assessments together and start thinking about how accurate they are, which is a little creepy, I think, especially
right?
The Gallup and the DISC. I don't think the Enneagram is particularly creepy because you're kind of self-assessing. But with the others, but with the others, you're answering these questions and they come up with these responses that are eerily accurate sometimes.
Right. You're just picking a few words and they're like, "I know your soul."
Right. And it's a little frightening. Basically, I love talking through these results with a coach that is familiar with different assessments than I'm familiar with. Partly because I think when you take these assessments and you can see the similarities in your results, it gives you just that much more confirmation that they're accurate and that you have work to do in order to apply these lessons and improve your relationships and communication.
Right. They all agree with each other, and but then, it'll at the same time be unpredictable in ways that are highly enlightening because, no matter how many test results we can sort of guess at, there's still the variety of human personality that just sneaks up on us. I love it.
Yeah. And, I find that when I read through the DISC results, I did have a few different insights than I would have gotten from the strengths results. Even though the personality characteristics are similar and I see the crossover between them. It was interesting, like you said, in terms of conflict, that I would step into it regardless, rather than stepping out of it and choosing not to participate.
Right. That's in your low C score. That's for caution and the tendency to be passive in conflictory situations. And you score like 20 out of 100 there.
Yeah, I'm not passive.
No, indeed.
No, indeed. Joy, this has been terrific, really full of insights, and I'm so glad we took the time to be able to talk through these. For our listeners, I will have links to Joy's website in case you want to learn more about what she does and perhaps consider looking into hiring her. I would particularly encourage people under 30 that are interested in this kind of self-assessment in order to prepare yourself for later in life and your future relationships. Joy is particularly insightful for people in those age ranges because she's been there, because she is there. And I just think that she would be a fantastic coach, particularly for young adults who are in transition and trying to figure out why their relationships aren't what they want them to be, and maybe where they're getting in their own way despite their incredible strengths and intelligence. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, and I would love to talk to you again about this maybe in a year after you've had even more experience with your coaching clients and see what other stories pop into your head.
Yeah, I'll have some stuff together. I'll be impressive. Oh, you won't even recognize me. I'll have an entourage next time.
Well, that seems really unlikely given your strengths.
Excuse you.
You'll have a fan base. You'll have a huge fan base, but I can't imagine you traveling with an entourage.
Oh, thank you. I'll take what I can get.
Yeah, well, it has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this journey takes you and to being as much a part of it as I can possibly be at this point. So thank
you so much for having me.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
Listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away?